London, and welcome back to the Matt Brown Podcast. We'll be right back.
Discover London Bicycle Cafe. It's the perfect time of year to take a break on their spacious patio, featuring craft beer, espresso drinks, snacks, meals, and more. London Bicycle Cafe at the Forks of the Thames. See you soon.
And we're back. We often refer to our city as the Forest City. There are many natural gems right across London. Westminster Ponds, Reservoir Hill, Springbank Park, and of course, Medway Valley. Medway Valley is a forest with a river running through its middle, right in the heart of London. It's a place where you can go for a long hike. You can appreciate the natural world without even leaving town. That said, there's a large group of Londoners who will never experience some of these natural wonders. Specifically, individuals who have mobility challenges. Maybe they use a wheelchair, a scooter, or a cane. The trails are not compatible with these assistive technologies, and they're therefore not accessible either. This challenge has a long history in London, specifically in the Medway Valley. Going back to 2002 and probably earlier, past councils have declared moratoriums on using asphalt, for example, for trails, with no science to back up the ban. When I was the brand new Ward 7 councillor in late 2010, a few of my colleagues attempted to remove specific line items out of the 10-year capital budget. My colleague, then Ward 8 councillor, Paul Hubert, caught on, and he said, "Hold up a sec." And then he asked, "What are these lines meant to fund?" Well, you guessed it. These budget dollars were earmarked to pay for studies, public consultation, and ultimately construction of the trails that would then provide more accessibility to people with mobility challenges in Medway Valley. It was late, the media didn't pick up on it, and ultimately, their motion to remove this funding lost with a wide margin. The budget remained, and the project continued. Thinking back to that day, I think that was a pretty underhanded move by a couple of my colleagues, and I'm glad it didn't work. That's where my journey with the Medway Valley Trail System began. And believe it or not, 15 years later, the debate, for some, continues. A couple of terms are going to come in handy as you listen to this episode. PAC means City Council's Planning and Environment Committee. 5 council members, plus the mayor, who sits on all of the committees, sit on this committee. They read reports, they review staff recommendations, they consult with citizens, they consult with developers, and then they make recommendations for all of council to consider about all things city planning. Another term is Type 3 trails. This is a term that is used to describe a hard-surfaced, accessible pathway. Experts study the area, they consult with professionals like environmental planners and archaeologists, and then they make a recommendation to members of the planning committee about where a Type 3 trail, an accessible trail, is appropriate and where it's not. And that's based on science and it's based on research. Presently, a small but important portion of the Medway Trail system is in question. Residents from the Attawandaron Neighbourhood, this is a neighbourhood in northwest London, just off Wonderland Road at Gainsborough. They attended a planning committee a couple of weeks ago and they lobbied for the Type 3 trail that is planned for the city property behind their homes and adjacent to Medway Valley be stopped. What's their issue? Well, there were a few. Green space is going to be naturalized. So picture tall grasses and shrubs instead of an open grassy field. And that's a problem for many of them because their backyards have creeped slowly into some of this public property. In other words, they risk losing land that they are using for their individual purposes that's not theirs. It's public property. They also claim that they've never been consulted about this project, which, with first-hand experience, there has been extensive public consultation and it's been occurring for over a decade. Remarkably, after hearing these delegations, the planning committee agreed and voted unanimously, 5-0, to pause construction and possibly cancel the pathway altogether. Some members of the committee made outlandish claims like this could be an archaeological site, and once the ground's been broken for a new pathway, artifacts might be found that cause the project to halt, or possibly millions of dollars of taxpayer money might be needed to mitigate the issue. This is simply not true. Another argument made by a member of the committee was that in places the trail was too narrow or the grade was too steep for a Type 3 trail. Again, not true. It's been studied by experts who determined that the trail will work here. This argument could even be laughable, considering what engineers are capable of designing and building here and around the world. You might be asking, okay, why an episode for this topic? Well, the recommendation goes to Council on Tuesday for debate and decision. Although the neighbours had an opportunity to share their perspective with the Planning and Environment Committee, no one was able to provide the history of this project or express their concerns from an accessibility lens. Jay Menard is the immediate past chair of the Council Advisory Committee that provides advice to City Council about accessibility matters. He wrote a letter to all of Council, signed by the past 5 chairs of this committee, to express their concerns. He's also asked to come on the show to share that perspective with you, and hopefully members of Council too. I have sympathy and I have understanding for councillors. Most of them work impossibly hard, and they deal with several hundred pages of reports each week. If they are relatively new, they may not even know the whole story. Councillors are autonomous. They make decisions with the best information they have on hand at the time. And I hope that they add the information they learn here, Jay's perspective, to that knowledge base. And I hope that before the debate and the final decision is made on Tuesday at the council meeting, that they'll take some time to consult with staff and learn the long history of this file. So, with that, let's go. Welcome to the show, Jay.
Well, thank you for having me, Matt. I really appreciate it.
You've recently written a letter to council as the immediate past chair of the Accessibility Community Advisory Committee. And what's interesting about this letter and really caught my attention is that the 4 preceding chairs of the committee co-signed this letter. I've been following council since at least as early as 2006. I had the privilege to be on council for 8 years, and I've been following them closely ever since. I've never seen anything like this before. And so I wonder if, just for some context, if you could explain to our listeners what this specific advisory committee has as its mandate, and then we're going to talk about the details in the letter right after that.
Well, I can tell you what the official designation of an advisory committee is, and also how we feel interpreted. So I think, honestly, from a council perspective, we often feel accessibility advisory committees, or advisory committees in general, are nuisances. It could just be like a checkbox or something that has to be done. Over the past few years, council has worked to minimize the number of advisory committees, but also restricted their mandate. The Accessibility Advisory Committee is a little bit different because it's mandated by AODA, which is the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, and municipalities have to have an active accessibility advisory committee.
So this is legislation.
This is legislation specifically for us. And the role of the committee is supposed to be providing insight and advice as it relates to all manner of municipal elements. So this could be anything from sidewalk creation to implementation of new parks, to rezoning requests, to transportation, to events and activities, just to make sure that people with adaptive technology needs or who have accessibility challenges are considered in the building and execution and maintenance. If I'm going to be as blunt as possible, we see our role as ensuring that all members of our community have equitable access to all that the community has to offer, and we're there to provide insight. And we have been a part of this, the rapid transit, with the changes with some of the bus stations, to sidewalk advocacy, to even something as simple as snow removal. All being involved in recommending and bringing the community's perspective to the table so that there's a better understanding of the impacts that it has and the requirements that the city has to adhere to legislation like AODA.
So that really, I think, paints a picture for our listeners. And I think people might be surprised to learn about the work that the committee does, and also be surprised to learn that legally this is required. This is something that every municipality, 444 of them right across Ontario, they have to have this committee. And I think it's reasonable to assume that there's an expectation that the committee will be listened to. So let's get to the letter. Like I had mentioned in my opening remarks, that I've not seen anything like this before, with that many past chairs signing a letter to council. So what's going on?
Well, we're really talking about the Medway Valley pathway and an acknowledgement of about 15 years worth of work that has been done amongst various councils. So that's why it was really important for 5 of the former ACAC chairs, including myself, who my term just ended a couple of months ago. It was important for us to step up and just remind the citizenry, remind council that this is not a fly-by-night operation. This isn't a last-minute decision. There has been tremendous amounts of work, not just from, say, the advisory committee perspective, but city staff, experts, counselors over various councils from since 2012. There's been so much work put into this that we, as former chairs, wanted to have that recognized that this is something that's been done. These are discussions. We all, going all the way back to Ashfaq Hussain, who was chair in 2002, but remained on the committee up until, I'm going to say, around 2020. I can't remember when he actually left. But we've all been involved, and many of us have been members of the committee before we were chairs. We've been part of this process. We've seen it firsthand. We've experienced it. We've gone to the path. We've had the negotiations. We've conceded in certain elements with different community members, despite their belief or not that these engagements have happened. That is why we felt it important. The other thing, too, is sitting members on committees aren't able to have the same freedom of expression when it comes to, I don't want to say directing council, because that's not at all what we're trying to do, but to be very blunt and upfront and honest about what we're trying to get here. And we felt it was our responsibility as stewards of this conversation for the past 2 decades, in the large part, to come forward as a unified group and say, you know what? This is important. This is why it's important. And we just want people to respect the process and understand that there has been a process that has been followed. And that's really a key message for us.
Yeah, and I can attest to that. I had the privilege of serving as the Ward 7 city councillor in 2010 to 2014. And this issue came up. It was the north part of the Medway Valley, north of Fanshawe Park Road. And I sat in on a tremendous number of meetings, both with neighborhood, with city staff, and it was a very contentious issue. So there's been a process, that's for sure. And then again, 2014 to 2018, I had the privilege to lead a council, and I was watching this process unfold. In the letter, you cited 25 points of contact and community consultation that have occurred beginning in February of 2012. At the time, this was a really hot issue. Why did you include all 25 points in that letter? What was the message you were trying to deliver?
To be honest, we listed those out because we wanted to counter some of the misconceptions or misrepresentations of the engagement process that were first listed. There was an article in the London Free Press, August 12th, where community members were saying, we've never been consulted. This is the first we've heard of it. And we've got councillors believing that and taking action against, basically on hearsay, as opposed to understanding that this has been a long and involved process. And as you said, there's been 25 points of connection. I can count at least 4 where everybody who lived within 120 meters of the Medway Valley was informed of public consultations. So these things happened. It may not have been memorable for the residents. They may choose not to remember it, but that doesn't mean they didn't happen. And so we want to make sure that even amongst these discussions that we're laying out the facts, even to the fact that when we look at the, initially there was a discussion of a bridge being built across part of the Attawandaron portion of the valley, due to the community and the committees, and all of us got together and said, you know what, we're going to acquiesce and we're going to remove this part of the plan and remove the bridge to address those community expressed concerns. So you really can't have it both ways. You can't have people saying, we had no idea, we were not informed, we were not properly consulted, but then also have this existence of community consultation resulting in change, 25 points of engagement, notes with actual members stating that with the removal of this bridge, we are in favor of this plan. Those two things can't exist in the same universe. One is true and one is not. And we know which one we believe happened. That is why we listed out in great detail all the points of conversation we had and all the opportunities that members of the community could participate.
So you felt like, as a part of this process, at one point in time, a compromise was made and there was a give and a take. And so there was no bridge, but this was going to be a class 3 pathway. And for people listening at home, a class 3 pathway could be asphalt. It doesn't have to be. It can be a hard surface that a person who uses a wheelchair for mobility, for example, can move across. So the other question I wanted to ask you, Jay, is folks at home, they might not know that Western operates an archaeological museum adjacent to this park. And one of the concerns that has been raised by, I believe it was the Deputy Mayor, Sean Lewis, is that this could be an archaeological site. There might have to be a dig. If they broke ground, then it could put the project on hold or cost a whole lot of money to deal with. What do you have to say about that?
Well, if ifs and buts were candy and nuts, oh, what a world this would be. I mean, I don't want to build on speculation. The Archaeological Museum was involved in these consultations. In fact, one of these engagements was housed at that location.
Now that you mention it, I was there.
Yeah, exactly. So they're part of the process. And not only are they aware that this issue could potentially come up, but they know how to mitigate it. They know how to deal with this. We want to deal with reality. We don't want to deal with speculations and ifs and what ifs. This is basically the plan that we've spoken about for 12 years or 15 years, however many years you want to count it. And since 2013 is the official start, we've addressed all these issues. We've worked with everybody. You talk about the paved path, and I know some people are like, well, I don't know if a paved path is appropriate in environmentally sensitive areas. Well, Algonquin Park has paved paths. There are other parks that have paved paths. And our point has always been not just to focus on people with disabilities or people requiring wheelchairs, but I'm a big advocate for the concept of universal accessibility. And a paved path or any sort of path that is constructed in a way that makes it easy to use has this really weird ancillary benefit of keeping people away from environmentally sensitive areas. If you have an easily accessible path that you can walk if you're able-bodied, you can push your child in a stroller if you have a family, if you are a senior and you need a walker that you can access, or if you're in a wheelchair and you need to come across, you're not going to start blazing new trails off the path and then potentially treading on protected plants or any other things that could be concerning. People will stay on the path, and it really does support. That's why we have environmental committee support. They came into this and saw the same value. This is a negotiation that's been done in consultation with city staff, with environmental groups, with the archaeological community, with accessibility advocates and representatives. This is not just something that was drawn in the, well, I was going to say drawn in the sand, but let's say drawn through the woods and said this would be a great idea. This has all been considered. And even some of the concerns with, say, oh, the grade may be too steep, there are ways to mitigate that, where it could be just diverting the path in a different direction, or even using some of the existing sidewalk and possibly going out into that area just for a very brief period of time to connect areas. There are solutions to be had, but to come in and say, this may cause all kinds of problems, or this may cost millions of dollars without understanding that all of this has been considered up until this point, and just to honestly disrespect the amount of work that people have put into this degree for 12 years, I have concerns with that as a decision-making process, especially when certain elements, like the lack of consultation, are just falsehoods. They're erroneous. That's not the case. And we want to make sure that when council is considering PAC's recommendation, they're doing so from a foundation of knowledge. They're doing so from a foundation of reality, to be honest, to know what has been done, what level of consultations have been done, and to evaluate on that alone, not necessarily on speculation or on statements that are proven to be erroneous. We want to just evaluate it on the facts. And up until this point, council had supported it. There's 3 members of council that have been on council since that 2013 period. There should be a familiarity and appreciation for this. And we're just asking council to respect the process that has happened to this day and view their decision through that lens.
It is interesting that 3 of the 15 members of council have been a part of some or all of this process. In the case of Councillor Anna Hopkins, we also have the current mayor who has been involved from 2014 to date.
And also Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yeah, that's right. Who, interestingly, was a part of the start of the process from 2010 to 2014, the Fontana Council. He lost to Councillor Ridley 2014 to 18, and now he's back. So interesting that there is actually some institutional memory on council as well. Now, when we look at some of the issues that have been raised, I think, as I follow the debates, are issues of encroachment.
Yeah, and that's fair. And the area that we're looking at is largely grassland, and the community members have been using this as a de facto private park for their areas. We also see with the backyard situation where there have been historical or legacy beliefs about how large the residence property is, but then when we actually get into the surveying, they see that there's not as much land, and this is actually city land. The park itself is going to be, from what I understand, naturalized. So I appreciate it. I mean, if you've had access to this, and many people may have purchased their homes based on access to this, I am very sympathetic to that. I am also not very sympathetic to perpetuating systemic ableism.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about that. So in the letter that you and the 4 other past chairs of the committee wrote to council, it is written pretty strongly and pretty directly. And you use a term, as you just mentioned, ableism. And I wonder if you could describe what that term means.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's hard for people to understand. If I say what racism is, or if I ask what sexism is, people have a clear understanding with that. Unfortunately, we use the term accessibility, and for some reason, when we look at matters that are impacting people with disabilities or who have adaptive technology needs, because we call it accessibility, it now becomes up for debate. It's now a line item on a spreadsheet and a cost to be evaluated, as opposed to something that was preventing the BIPOC community from fully participating in all elements of the community. People would be livid. They would be up in arms. We would have counselors and have had counselors at Victoria Park joining in protests against systemic racism or any of the other issues that have happened. You know, we have representation on council historically and currently of LGBTQ2S plus people. And if there were issues that were preventing members from that community from fully participating, there would be protests and people would be livid. But for some reason, it's okay to say, yes, this group of people, because they require wheelchairs or they're visually impaired or for whatever reason, we're going to negotiate with their human rights. We are going to say it's okay for a certain segment of the community not to be able to fully participate in the community to the best of their abilities in an equitable manner. And I don't understand that. And so that's why it's easy to say accessibility. Accessibility is a very vague term. It's easy to explain away. I want to use ableism because that's what it is. It is an ableist view of the world that excludes people who have disabilities or who require adaptive technologies. It excludes them from certain elements of that. And to me, that's not okay and should be viewed through the exact same lens on issues related to race, sex, gender discrimination, sexuality, however you want to do that. I think it should be seen the same way. So I don't understand why, and we've been dealing with various councils over the year who are willing to negotiate away, say, sidewalk access, even though the implementation of sidewalks is a part of the London plan. When streets are being updated with significant renovations and there's no sidewalks, there's language that says a sidewalk must be put in. But over the past couple of councils, we've had these elements in certain areas of the city come up where these rights have been negotiated away because of political pressure or because they don't want to offend. And this is in my mind, I'm going to be honest, but I don't think I'm wrong. But there's a desire not to offend certain elements of the community. And so accessibility is sacrificed at the altar of political expediency. I hope that's not the case, but I've seen too much over my years as chair and as a member to say that there's not a little give and take here. And unfortunately, the most vulnerable of the accessible community members are the ones that are sacrificed to that political expediency.
And they don't have the ability to speak up for themselves.
No, and I don't think it's like if you look at the history of, say, sidewalks where communities have not had sidewalks put in, some of the less affluent neighborhoods, the sidewalks are in no problem. There's no complaints. It's in some of the more affluent areas where there's a lot of political pressure exerted. That's where we see change. And that's where we see all of a sudden the willingness to go against AOTA principles, which by 2025, this community and the province as a whole is supposed to be fully accessible. It's not happening, but it's because of reasons like this. We just want to take that off the table. You shouldn't be able to negotiate human rights because of personal preference or political will. It should be viewed in the same way that any other ism is.
Well, thank you for the explanation. I mean, it's one thing, and believe me, I know it because I still have the scars to prove it, to send a letter with powerful language and words that have, very, very heavy meaning, weigh 800, 1,000 pounds, and not provide an explanation. I appreciate that you provided that explanation, and I appreciate that you provide that perspective. And I also, maybe I feel a little bit defensive because I'm a past elected official, but I want to point out that something very interesting is happening in this specific situation, and that is that Sam Trauzow, who is the representative for the Attawandaron community, these are voters, constituents that live in the area that he represents, and he's taken a different stand. He's saying that the pathway should go through, that we need to think about the bigger picture, and that takes, I'm just going to say, a lot of political courage. We're almost out of time, and it's been a very interesting conversation, and it's a serious conversation. There's no question about that. I want folks at home to know that there's a little bit of order of operations here, and they might be wondering, well, Jay and the past chairs, they sent a letter. Well, holy cow. And I think it's important to know that that's all you can do at this point. So the Planning and Environment Committee, they are able to take delegations. They took some delegation representatives from the neighborhood.
Yes, and nobody on the accessibility committee or within the advocacy community was aware that this item was going to be on the agenda at that meetings.
And so you're in a kind of between a rock and a hard place in this situation, because formal delegations can't address full council. It's in the procedural bylaws. It can be frustrating to community groups. It can be frustrating to advocates. But the place where these conversations are supposed to be taking place are at the committee level. So the Planning and Environment Committee, your group could have requested delegation status. The current committee that represents all of the things that we've been talking about today, they could have asked for delegation status. What happened there?
Don't know. We found out after the fact then that the community itself had received delegation status. So at PAC, all they heard was the disgruntled community members. From what I know, the Accessibility Committee was not informed that this item was appearing on the agenda. There was no accessibility representation at that meeting. And I guarantee you, had we known, whether it's the formal committee, I don't want to speak on behalf of the current committee, but I do know that all 5 of us on this letter and many others of us who have left the formal committee structure would have been there or have had some conversations to bring this to light and to provide a little bit more context. Ultimately, to your point, we're restricted to what we can do. We can put a letter in. And yes, we worded it fairly forcefully, but I believe respectfully. But ultimately, and it says in the introduction that I wrote, we're just asking for respect. We're asking for respect of a process that's been happening for 12 years. We're asking for respect of the experts that have been involved in this, that have addressed and foreseen these issues, respect of the community engagements, the 25 community engagements that have been done, or community interaction points, however we want to describe them. Just respect that this has been done, and don't make a snap decision based on one meeting with a very vested group of interested parties without looking at everything else that's been done.
Okay, well, then I think the next logical question is, what do you want to see happen from here?
Flippantly, nothing. I would love for council to just throw out this recommendation. Currently, the recommendation is to put this project on hold. We would ask council to look at the amount of work that's been done in the past, view this through the appropriate lens, and to reject that recommendation and to continue on with the development of the Medway Valley in an accessible manner. I've mentioned the term universal accessibility. This isn't just, and I'm going to say this to your listeners, and hopefully they share it with the community members. Please reach out to your counselor if you can. Talk about how you support this, because accessibility is not just for people with canes. It's not just for people with wheelchairs. Accessibility benefits us all. For people who may have a small child in a stroller that they want to walk through, the park, having an accessible trail makes it easier for them to share that experience with their family. For people who may have aged family members that want to enjoy this experience, accessibility and having accessible trails makes it easier for them as well. And for those who are concerned about potential environmental damage and traffic coming into these areas, as we said before, trails have this real interesting side benefit of keeping people on them. So we are going to do a better job at protecting the environment by giving people defined pathways. So not only can more people enjoy everything that this wonderful community has to offer, but we can protect this for generations in the future.
Yeah, and if I can just add a little bit of perspective to that, when this was introduced to me as an issue in Medway Valley North in 2012, it was a very hard story to hear. A mom and a dad who had lived all over the world, New Zealand, Houston, Texas, among others. They had a young son who used a wheelchair for mobility, and they purchased a home in Sunningdale West because they were told that there was going to be a trail system that was class 3, so pavement or hard surface, so that this young person could travel on his own across the valley over to Sunningdale, which is a little bit to the east, and visit his friend who also used a wheelchair for mobility. And that's what really, caught my attention. And I think if we boil it down to its simplest form, the last 12 years meant that of really very little action and delay meant that this young person is now probably 30 and wasn't able to have the kind of freedoms that he felt, his parents felt were promised to him. And so I think that there is a consequence. Sometimes people say, geez, if we just hit pause, what's the harm? And I think there are unintended consequences to hitting pause.
And I think there's unintended benefits of continuing an accessible pathway in general in life. Like when we talk about the curb cut effect. So just a familiarity for those who are on sidewalks, the curb cut is what gets you down onto the road. And yes, it's for people who have, say, vision problems or mobility challenges to know where those roads begin. But if you're pushing a stroller, that's a huge benefit.
A parent and one of your kids is learning to ride their bike and they can get up onto the curb. And
I've been in so many airports and train stations where the news is on and I'm reading the captions. Those aren't intended for me as a person who can hear, but I can't hear in that environment, so I can read that and stay up to date. Even the push button doors, if you've got arms full of groceries and you can give a little hip check to that door to automatically open. It's not intended for you, but you can benefit from it. And that's really when we look at accessibility, it benefits us all in so many different ways. And ultimately, we're creating a more inclusive community for everybody. I don't know how you could not support that.
Yeah. And so this really isn't what you're saying. This isn't about environment versus accessibility.
No, it's all about complementing, and it's honestly the accessibility of this trail will improve and protect the environment. It is a very synergistic approach that we've taken. We see the benefits of universal accessibility, and we honestly hope that council and the citizens of London support this.
So you've made that really clear, and really our backs are against the wall here. We're just about out of time. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about? Is there anything that you wish that I had asked about?
No, I think you've covered everything, and I think the reality is we're just asking council to respect the work that's been done, not just selfishly from an accessibility advisory committee perspective, but to consider the work of city staff, the environmental experts, the archaeological experts. Consider the fact that this is law, AOTA compliance. We are supposed to be fully accessible. We're trying to protect the city from any potential lawsuits, any potential human rights claims. And this is such a simple solution that has been discussed for so long that to derail it at this point just seems irresponsible. And we're just asking council to respect the work process and respect the work that's been done.
Fair enough. And we're going to have to leave it at that. Thanks again, Jay, for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for giving us a chance to speak, and I appreciate the time today.
And we'll be right back.
Discover London Bicycle Cafe, home of family cargo and urban cycling. Test ride an e-bike along riverside trails to see how easy moving through our city can really be. London Bicycle Cafe at the Forks of the Thames. See you soon.
Well, that's the show for today. As always, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you've learned something new. Thanks to Jay Menard for joining us, and as always, thank you for listening. Like I always say, this show is for you. Jay provided an important perspective and a voice for thousands of Londoners that is often not heard. What happens next? I guess we stay tuned, and I guess we wait to see what Council does later this week. This is the last podcast for the summer, and I am so pleased with its growth. As you listen to this episode, know that there have been over 700 downloads of the Matt Brown podcast, and things are still picking up. Please share this with your friends and on your social media platforms, and please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Here's something new too. The show now has a website. You can visit themattbrownpodcast.com. You can review previous episodes and get in touch with me too. Maybe you have an idea about a future show or a comment about a previous one. Visit the website and send it in. The messages will come directly to me and I'll read every one of them. Also, there are some small costs associated with producing a podcast. If you're enjoying this content, if you're finding some value in the information that's being provided, you might consider making a small contribution in support of the podcast by visiting the website and clicking the Buy Me a Coffee button. Any contribution is appreciated and definitely not expected. The website will grow. Next, I'm going to figure out how to add a voicemail button to the platform so you can call in and let us know what you think using an audio format too. With that, thanks for listening. Bye for now. And talk to you in the fall, London.